Would you believe me if I told you I once laughed at a patient for keeping a small statue of the Virgin Mary by her bed? Could you imagine that I, a healthcare professional trained to show compassion, once removed a rosary from a terminal patient's hands because I thought it was unhygienic? What if I confessed that my entire worldview changed one night when I saw a deceased teenager walking through the hospital corridors holding a rosary that illuminated the darkness with a light that no medical science could explain? My name is Francesca Moretti. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 14 years, I've worked as a critical care nurse at Ospedale San Raffaele in Milan, Italy. I built my career on scientific precision, evidence-based practice, and a firm belief that what cannot be measured or observed in a laboratory simply does not exist. I prided myself on my rationality in a profession where emotional detachment can be necessary for survival. If you're watching this testimony right now, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. Please share in the comments below and consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of extraordinary spiritual encounters that challenge our understanding of reality. What I'm about to share has remained my closely guarded secret for almost 3 years. I've only told a handful of trusted individuals, fearing ridicule from my medical colleagues and potential damage to my professional reputation. But I can no longer remain silent. The events that began on the night of September 23, 2020, in the oncology ward of San Raffaele Hospital have transformed me from a cynical skeptic to someone who now recognizes that our sterile medical worldview captures only a fraction of what constitutes reality. It was the middle of my night shift, around 2:15 a.m. The ward was quiet, with most patients finally asleep after their evening treatments. I was completing my charting at the nurses' station when the call button for room 307 lit up. With a sigh of mild irritation, night shifts were for catching up on paperwork, not patient demands, I made my way down the dimly lit corridor. Room 307 housed Maria Bianchi, a 76-year-old woman with advanced pancreatic cancer. Her prognosis was poor. We all knew she had weeks, perhaps days left. What made Maria stand out among our patients wasn't her condition, but her unwavering faith. Her bedside table displayed a small statue of the Virgin Mary, and she clutched a worn rosary almost constantly. Her religious devotion had become something of a running joke among certain staff members, myself included, I'm ashamed to admit. We considered her faith a quaint anachronism, a psychological crutch for someone facing the inevitable. When I entered her room that night, Maria was sitting upright in bed, her thin frame silhouetted against the soft glow of the monitoring equipment. "Nurse," she said with surprising clarity for someone in her condition, "I need to ask you something important." I checked her vital signs while responding with professional efficiency. "What is it, Signora Bianchi? Are you in pain?" She shook her head slowly, still clutching that ever-present rosary. No pain tonight, but I need you to promise me something." I braced myself for what I assumed would be a request to call a priest or some other religious figure. Requests I typically delegated to other nurses who didn't mind indulging what I considered superstitious nonsense. "When I'm gone," Maria continued, her eyes fixed on mine with unexpected intensity, "please give this to someone who needs it more than I will." She extended her hand, offering me the rosary. I couldn't hide my discomfort. "Signora Bianchi, you should save that for your family. I'm sure your children or grandchildren." "I have no family left," she interrupted gently. "And this rosary has a special blessing. It was touched to the tomb of a young boy named CARLO ACUTIS. He understood the power of modern things, computers, the internet, but also the eternal things." I forced a polite smile while internally rolling my eyes. In my mind, I was already composing the amusing anecdote I would share with colleagues during our break. The terminal patient who thought a blessed rosary was more valuable than pain medication. "I'll keep that in mind," I said dismissively, adjusting her IV line. "Now try to get some sleep. The doctor will be doing rounds early tomorrow." As I turned to leave, Maria caught my wrist with surprising strength. "You don't believe now, Nurse Moretti, but soon you will see. Carlo has a way of finding those who need him most." I gently extracted my arm from her grip, attributing her cryptic statement to the combination of pain medication and religious fervor. "Good night, Signora Bianchi," I said firmly, closing the door behind me. Back at the nurse's station, I shared Maria's odd behavior with my colleague Elena, who worked in pediatric oncology. Unlike me, Elena had a respectful attitude toward patients' religious beliefs, though she didn't consider herself particularly devout. "Carlo Acutis?" she repeated, looking up from her charts. "That name sounds familiar." She typed briefly on the computer. "Ah, here it is. He was a teenager who died of leukemia in 2006. Apparently, he used his computer skills to document Eucharistic miracles online. The Vatican is considering him for beatification." I scoffed. "Perfect. Our patient is putting her faith in a dead teenager instead of medical science." Elena gave me a look of gentle reproach. "You know, Francesca, being skeptical is one thing, but mocking patients' beliefs doesn't help their healing process. Studies show that spiritual well-being can positively impact physical outcomes, regardless of whether the beliefs are objectively true." I waved my hand dismissively. "Save the lecture. I provide evidence-based care. If patients want spiritual comfort, they can call the hospital chaplain." Our conversation was interrupted by alarms from another room, and we both rushed to attend to a patient in distress. The remainder of the shift was busy, and I forgot about Maria Bianchi and her blessed rosary, at least for a few hours. Around 4:30 a.m., the ward had settled back into its nighttime rhythm. I was making my final rounds before the morning shift arrived when I passed room 307. Something made me pause outside Maria's door. Perhaps a sense of guilt over my earlier dismissiveness, or simply professional thoroughness. I quietly opened the door to check on her. The room was dimly lit by the monitors, their steady beeping confirming she was stable. Maria appeared to be sleeping peacefully, her thin chest rising and falling in shallow but regular breaths. The small statue of the Virgin Mary still stood on her bedside table, but I noticed the rosary was no longer in her hands. It now lay on top of a folded piece of paper at the foot of her bed. Curious, I approached to return the rosary to the table. Patients often dropped things in their sleep. As I reached for the beads, I noticed my name written on the folded paper. With a mixture of confusion and unease, I picked up the note and opened it. "Nurse Moretti," it read in shaky handwriting. "By the time you read this, I will have departed. The rosary is now yours. As Carlo has shown me, you will need it soon. When you see him, please remember that light always overcomes darkness, and that God's love finds us even when we reject it." I looked up sharply at Maria, suddenly noticing the unnatural stillness of her form. The monitors continued to beep normally, showing stable vital signs, but instinct told me something was wrong. I rushed to her side and checked for a pulse. Nothing. I called a code blue immediately, and within seconds, the quiet night erupted into the controlled chaos of a resuscitation attempt. The emergency team worked methodically, but it was clear Maria had been gone for some time, despite what the still-functioning monitors suggested. The attending physician called time of death at 4:47 a.m. As the team dispersed, I stood frozen beside Maria's bed, the note clutched in my hand, her rosary somehow now wrapped around my wrist, though I had no memory of putting it there. The monitors, which had shown normal readings just minutes before, now displayed flat lines. It was impossible. Modern medical equipment doesn't simply malfunction in this specific way, continuing to show normal vital signs for a patient who had clearly been dead for some time. I should have immediately documented the equipment failure, called for the devices to be checked, followed protocol. Instead, I found myself carefully folding Maria's note and slipping it into my pocket. I gently unwound the rosary from my wrist and was about to place it with her other belongings when something stopped me. Against all my rational judgment, against every professional boundary I had maintained throughout my career, I placed the rosary in my pocket alongside the note. The morning shift arrived. Reports were given, and Maria Bianchi's body was prepared for transfer to the morgue. I completed my documentation, making no mention of the equipment anomaly, the note, or the rosary. As I left the hospital that morning, the bright September sun momentarily blinded me, as if highlighting the darkness of the deception I had just committed. Taking a patient's personal item was not only unprofessional, but potentially illegal. Yet the rosary felt strangely heavy in my pocket, as if demanding acknowledgement. I told myself I would return it to the hospital's storage of patients' effects later. For now, I needed sleep and distance from the unsettling events of the night. If you've ever experienced something that made you question what you thought you knew about the world, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful moments in our lives are those that challenge our deepest assumptions. If you're finding value in this testimony, please consider subscribing to join our community where we explore these profound mysteries together. I arrived home, exhausted, but strangely alert. My small apartment in central Milan had always been my sanctuary, a place of order and rationality, decorated in minimalist style, with medical textbooks neatly arranged and not a religious symbol in sight. I placed Maria's rosary on my kitchen table, intending to shower and sleep before deciding what to do with it. But as the water washed over me, her words echoed in my mind. Carlo has a way of finding those who need him most. Who was this Carlo Acutis, and why did his name now feel significant in a way it hadn't hours before? Clean and dressed in comfortable clothes, I made a decision that surprised me. Instead of sleeping, I sat down at my computer and typed Carlo Acutis into the search engine. The results displayed the face of an ordinary-looking teenage boy with slightly tousled hair and a warm smile. Not the solemn, austere image of traditional saints I remembered from my lapsed Catholic childhood. Born in 1991, Carlo had been a normal adolescent in many ways. He loved soccer, video games, and Pokemon. But he had also demonstrated extraordinary devotion to the Eucharist from a young age, calling it his highway to heaven. What caught my attention was his talent with computers. In the early 2000s, before social media as we know it today, this teenager had created websites cataloging Eucharistic miracles from around the world. He had effectively used the technology of his time to promote his faith, earning him the nickname God's Influencer, or the patron saint of the internet. Carlo had died of acute promyelocytic leukemia in 2006 at just 15 years old, reportedly accepting his diagnosis with remarkable serenity, offering his suffering for the Pope and the Church. What struck me most was how recent this all was. Not some remote medieval story, but events that had occurred within my lifetime, in the same city where I now lived and worked. I read accounts of his last days, of the peace with which he faced death, and found myself unexpectedly moved. This was not the distant, abstract faith I had rejected. This was something immediate and authentic. As I continued reading, my scientific mind searching for logical explanations, my eyes grew heavy. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. The last thing I remember before drifting off at my desk was looking at a photograph of Carlo's tomb in Assisi, wondering about the connection between this boy and the rosary now lying on my kitchen table. I slept deeply, but woke with a start at exactly 3:00 p.m., a specific time I would later learn had significance in Catholic tradition as the hour of mercy. Disoriented, I lifted my head from my desk, my neck stiff from the awkward position. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of traffic outside my window. Something felt different. The quality of light, the temperature of the air, something intangible but unmistakable. As I stood and stretched, I noticed the rosary was no longer on the kitchen table where I had left it. Confused and slightly alarmed, I lived alone and my apartment had been locked. I began searching. I found it on my nightstand, though I had no memory of placing it there. Next to it was Maria's note, which I distinctly remembered leaving in the pocket of my scrubs. I was reaching for the rosary when my phone rang, startling me. It was Elena from the hospital. "Francesca, she said without preamble. "Did you hear about Maria Bianchi?" My heart raced. Had someone discovered I had taken the rosary? "What about her?" I asked cautiously. The autopsy results came back. They're saying she died peacefully in her sleep from natural causes related to her cancer. But get this, they're estimating time of death around 2:20 a.m. I sank onto my bed. That's impossible. I spoke with her after that time, and the monitors were showing normal vitals until almost 4:30. Elena was silent for a moment. That's what I told them. But they're insisting the biological evidence is clear. And there's something else. They found a printed photo of CARLO ACUTIS in her personal effects. The strange thing is, it has your name written on the back. I felt a chill despite the warmth of my apartment. "Elena, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to think I've lost my mind." I proceeded to tell her about my conversation with Maria, the note, the rosary, and the impossibility of the monitors showing vitals for a patient who, according to medical science, had already been dead for hours. Elena listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said something that surprised me. "I think you should go to Mass this evening." I laughed nervously. "Elena, I haven't been to church in 20 years. I don't think lighting candles is going to explain medical equipment failure." "It's not about the candles," she replied seriously. "Today is a special day in the liturgical calendar, and the Mass is at San Stefano Maggiore, just 3 blocks from your apartment. Just go, Francesca. What do you have to lose?" After we hung up, I sat staring at the rosary on my nightstand. The rational part of my mind was working overtime to create logical explanations. I was overtired and had misremembered the sequence of events. The monitors had malfunctioned in a way that coincidentally seemed meaningful. I had unconsciously moved the rosary while in a state of exhaustion. But another part of me, a part I had long ignored, was whispering that some experiences transcend rational explanation, that perhaps the most rational response to inexplicable events is to remain open to possibilities beyond our current understanding. At 6:30 p.m., driven by a curiosity I couldn't articulate even to myself, I found myself walking through the doors of San Stefano Maggiore. The church was more crowded than I had expected for a weekday evening. I slipped into a pew at the back, feeling like an imposter in this space of faith. The Mass was already underway, the priest's melodic Italian flowing over the congregation. I understood the words but felt disconnected from their meaning, an anthropologist observing an unfamiliar cultural ritual. I hadn't bothered to learn why Elena had thought this particular Mass was significant. I was simply going through the motions to appease my own curiosity. As the service continued, my mind wandered to the hospital, to Maria Bianchi, to the scientific impossibility of what I had experienced. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the priest's words. Today, as we celebrate this Mass in honor of Blessed Carlo Acutis on the anniversary of his beatification, we are reminded that sanctity is not a distant ideal, but a daily choice available to all, especially the young. My attention snapped back to the present. The priest was speaking about Carlo, the same boy whose image I had been researching hours earlier, whose name had been on Maria's lips shortly before her impossible death. This could not be coincidence. The universe was not this precisely orchestrated without meaning. As if in confirmation of my thoughts, I felt the rosary in my pocket grow strangely warm. I had brought it with me, not out of devotion, but because I was reluctant to leave it in my apartment after finding it mysteriously moved. Now it seemed to pulse with energy, like a living thing responding to Carlo's name. The Mass concluded, but I remained seated as others filed out. I needed a moment to process this convergence of improbabilities. The church gradually emptied until I was alone, or so I thought. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from beside me, though I was certain no one had been sitting there moments before. I turned to find a young man, perhaps 17 or 18 years old, gesturing toward the ornate altar. He wore jeans and a simple gray hoodie, looking like any other teenager except for an unusual clarity in his eyes. "The art, the architecture," he continued when I didn't respond. created by human hands yet pointing to something beyond the human. His Italian was perfect, but carried a slight accent I couldn't place. "Yes," I managed, disoriented by his sudden appearance. "The church is very beautiful." He smiled as if I had said something amusing. "I wasn't talking about the building, Nurse Moretti." My breath caught. I hadn't introduced myself, was not wearing my hospital ID or anything that identified my profession. "Who are you?" I asked, though some part of me already knew or feared the answer. "I think you know," he replied gently. "My name is Carlo." The logical part of my brain immediately began generating explanations. This was a prank orchestrated by hospital colleagues who had noticed my interest in the Carlo Acutis story. This was a psychological break triggered by sleep deprivation and stress. This was an elaborate scam by someone exploiting the vulnerable. "Carlo Acutis died in 2006, I stated flatly, clinging to the certainty of this fact. The young man nodded. "Yes, on October 12th. I was 15 years old. Acute promyelocytic leukemia, M3 variant. The same disease I now help others overcome." His medical knowledge was unsettling, but still explainable. Anyone could research a disease online. "Prove it," I challenged, my voice harsher than I intended. "Prove you're Carlo Acutis and not some sick individual preying on people's beliefs." Instead of being offended, he seemed to consider my demand thoughtfully. "Proof is complicated, isn't it? Scientific minds want empirical evidence. But some realities exist beyond what can be measured in a laboratory." He gestured to my pocket. "You're carrying Maria Bianchi's rosary, the one she received after visiting my tomb in Assisi last year, when her cancer was first diagnosed. The one she was holding when she died at exactly 2:17 a.m. Though your hospital monitors continued showing vital signs for hours afterward, technology capturing what science cannot yet explain, the transition of a soul." I felt dizzy. These were details I hadn't shared with anyone except Elena, and some I hadn't shared at all. "This isn't possible," I whispered. Carlo's expression was compassionate. "Francesca, you've spent your career easing the transition between life and death. You've held the hands of the dying, witnessed their final moments, brought scientific precision to the most profound human experience. Did you never once, in all those moments, sense something beyond the biological process? Never once feel the presence of something your medical textbooks couldn't explain?" Unbidden, memories surfaced, moments I had suppressed or rationalized throughout my nursing career. The terminal patient who had no visitors yet died with a smile while looking at an empty chair beside her bed. The elderly man who had accurately described conversations occurring in the waiting room while he was clinically dead during resuscitation. The child who had spoken lucidly about the light people minutes before unexpected cardiac arrest. "Those were coincidences," I insisted weakly. "Neurological phenomena during the shutdown of consciousness. Science hasn't explained them yet, but it will." Carlo nodded understandingly. "Science is a beautiful tool for understanding God's creation. I love technology, you know. I used computers to share my faith. But science and faith answer different questions. How versus why. Both are pathways to truth." He leaned slightly closer. "Maria Bianchi knew this. That's why she wanted you to have her rosary. She recognized in you what I see now, someone whose compassion and search for truth have been confined to too small a space." I stared at him, unable to form a coherent response. This conversation violated everything I understood about reality, yet it was happening with the same tangible certainty as any other interaction in my daily life. "Why me?" I finally managed. "Why are you appearing to me? I'm not religious. I've actively discouraged patients' faith. I've mocked people like Maria for their beliefs." Carlo's smile was gentle but knowing. Sometimes those who resist faith most strongly are those who hunger for it most deeply. You've dedicated your life to healing bodies. Perhaps now you're being invited to consider the reality of the soul." Before I could respond, the church lights dimmed slightly, then brightened again. A momentary power fluctuation. In that brief darkness, Carlo vanished. Not gradually, not by walking away, but simply ceasing to be present in the space he had occupied seconds before. I sat frozen, my heart racing. Had anyone else been in the church, they would surely have thought I was having a medical emergency. Perhaps I was. Perhaps this entire experience was a manifestation of stress, grief over a patient's death, and exhaustion combining to create a vivid hallucination. I reached into my pocket for my phone to call Elena, needing to ground myself in normal conversation. My fingers found the rosary instead, and as I touched it, something extraordinary happened. The beads began to emit a soft, pulsing light, not reflecting existing light, but generating their own gentle luminescence. It was subtle enough that I might have doubted my own perception had I not been staring directly at the phenomenon. This was not the phosphorescence of certain chemicals or the trick of ambient light on reflective surfaces. This was something else entirely. I dropped the rosary as if it had burned me. It fell to the church floor, the light immediately fading as it left my touch. With shaking hands, I picked it up again. Ordinary beads once more, cool and inert in my palm. I fled the church, practically running the 3 blocks to my apartment. Once safely inside, I placed the rosary in a drawer and took 2 anti-anxiety medications from my personal supply, prescribed months earlier for occasional panic attacks. The logical part of my brain diagnosed my own condition. Acute stress reaction, possibly with hallucinatory features. I needed sleep, proper nutrition, and perhaps a consultation with a psychiatrist colleague. I did not need mystical experiences or conversations with deceased teenagers. I called in sick for my shift the next day, something I rarely did, and fell into a dreamless pharmaceutical sleep. When I awoke 14 hours later, the events of the previous day seemed distant and unreal. In the harsh light of morning, my scientific mind reasserted control. I had been overworked and emotionally affected by a patient's death. I had researched CARLO ACUTIS online and then experienced a vivid hallucination incorporating that information. The rosary had not glowed. I had experienced a visual disturbance possibly related to migraine prodrome. Everything had a rational explanation. I made coffee and vowed to return to normal life. I would drop Maria's rosary at the hospital's lost and found, claiming I had found it in the corridor and put this entire disturbing episode behind me. I opened the drawer where I had stashed the rosary, but it wasn't there. Confused, I searched the entire apartment, becoming increasingly frantic as my search proved fruitless. Had I lost it during my hasty exit from the church? Had I somehow misremembered where I placed it? As I stood in the middle of my living room, contemplating the possibility that I was experiencing genuine cognitive impairment, my doorbell rang. The sound was so normal, so everyday, that it momentarily grounded me. I opened the door to find a courier holding a small package. "Delivery for Francesca Moretti," he said cheerfully, handing me an envelope. I hadn't ordered anything and wasn't expecting any deliveries. The sender information was blank. I signed for the package and closed the door, turning the mysterious envelope over in my hands. It was lightweight but rigid, as if containing something solid rather than documents. With growing unease, I opened it and tipped the contents onto my coffee table. A rosary fell out, but not Maria's worn wooden beads. This was a silver rosary with a small medal attached to the crucifix. Accompanying it was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Nurse Moretti, thank you for your kindness to my son during his final days. He spoke of you often. When I heard of your interest in CARLO ACUTIS, I wanted you to have this rosary which was blessed at his tomb. Maria Bianchi's rosary has been returned to our family as she requested before her death, but she wanted you to have this one instead. With gratitude, Antonia Salzano." My hands trembled as I read the signature again. Antonia Salzano was CARLO ACUTIS's mother. But how could she possibly know about me? I had never treated her son. He had died years before I began working at San Raffaele. And how did she know about Maria Bianchi, who had just died 2 days ago? I turned the envelope over, looking for a return address, finding none. I examined the rosary closely. It appeared to be genuine silver, the craftsmanship exquisite. The small medal attached to it bore the image of Carlo Acutis with his birth and death dates. None of this made any sense. Needing answers, I called the hospital and asked to be connected to medical records. Using my staff credentials, I requested information on any patient named Carlo Acutis who had been treated at San Raffaele. "I'm sorry, Nurse Moretti," the records clerk said after a few minutes of searching. "We have no record of a patient by that name at our facility." This aligned with what I had read online. Carlo had been treated at a different hospital in Milan. "However," the clerk continued unexpectedly, "there is a note in the system under that name. It's unusual. It's not attached to a patient file." My pulse quickened. "What does it say?" "It's dated October 12, 2006, and it simply states, Carlo Acutis, departed 6:45 a.m., Nurse Francesca Moretti in attendance." "That's strange. You would have been." I supplied the information she was calculating. I would have been 19 years old, still in nursing school. I didn't start working at San Raffaele until 2011. The clerk made a sound of confusion. "Must be a clerical error or a different Moretti. I'll flag it for correction." After hanging up, I sat staring at the silver rosary on my coffee table. The rational explanations were becoming increasingly complex and unlikely. A clerical error from 14 years ago that happened to connect me to Carlo Acutis. A mistaken identity with another Moretti who had supposedly attended his death at a hospital where he wasn't even a patient? And how to explain the note from his mother, or Maria Bianchi's impossible knowledge of my future encounter with him? I picked up the silver rosary, half expecting it to glow like Maria's had in the church. It remained ordinary, cool metal against my skin. Yet holding it gave me a strange sense of calm amidst my confusion. On an impulse that surprised me, I typed Antonia Salzano Milan into my phone's search engine. If Carlo's mother lived in Milan, perhaps I could meet her directly and get answers to my questions. The search yielded a result. She was scheduled to speak at a Catholic youth conference that very weekend at a church across the city. The topic of her talk, Digital Witness, Carlo Acutis' Legacy for Today's Youth. Without allowing myself to overthink the decision, I made plans to attend. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in the back row of a packed auditorium at the conference center. I felt profoundly out of place among the energetic young Catholics, like an anthropologist observing an unfamiliar culture. When Antonia Salzano took the stage, I studied her intently. An elegant woman in her early 60s, with a poised demeanor and kind eyes that reminded me of the young man I had met in the church. She spoke eloquently about her son's life, his devotion to the Eucharist, his talent with computers, his compassion for the marginalized. She described his acceptance of his leukemia diagnosis and the peace with which he faced death. Much of it aligned with what I had read online, but hearing it from his mother gave it an intimacy and authenticity that moved me unexpectedly. As she concluded her talk, she said something that sent a chill through me. Carlo continues his mission even now. He appears to those who need him most, often those who are furthest from faith. My son was never one to stay within expected boundaries, in life or in death. The audience chuckled appreciatively, but I sat frozen, my heart racing. Was it possible she knew about my experience? After the talk, attendees gathered around Antonia, asking for photographs and sharing how Carlo had impacted their lives. I hung back, uncertain whether to approach her. What would I say? "Your deceased son appeared to me in a church and your note arrived mysteriously at my apartment?" Before I could decide, the crowd around her thinned and our eyes met across the room. A look of recognition crossed her face. She excused herself from the remaining well-wishers and walked directly toward me. "Nurse Moretti," she said warmly, taking my hands in hers. "I'm so glad you came. Carlo told me you might." I stared at her, speechless. She continued as if this were a perfectly normal conversation. "You received the rosary I sent? The silver suits you better than Maria's wooden beads, I think." "How?" I began, struggling to form a coherent question from the dozens swirling in my mind. "How do you know who I am? How do you know about Maria Bianchi? I never treated your son. He died years before I began working at San Rafael." Antonia smiled gently. "Carlo moves between worlds now, Francesca. Time works differently where he is. He told me about your kindness to him during his final hours, and about your recent conversation in the church." She spoke with such matter-of-fact certainty that I momentarily wondered if I was the one who had lost touch with reality. "But I wasn't there when Carlo died," I insisted. "I couldn't have been. I was still a nursing student." Antonia's expression was enigmatic. "Perhaps you haven't been there yet." Before I could ask what she meant by this cryptic statement, she was called away by the event organizer. She embraced me quickly. "Keep the rosary with you, especially during your night shifts. Carlo has more to show you." She pressed something into my hand, a small card with Carlo's photograph, and then she was gone, surrounded again by admirers. I looked down at the card. On the back was handwritten, "Ospedale San Raffaele, October 12, 2006, room 215. A date in the past, but a specific room in the hospital where I currently worked. I left the conference more confused than when I had arrived. Antonia Salzano seemed entirely lucid and rational, yet she spoke of impossibilities as if they were commonplace. Either she was experiencing a complex delusion that somehow aligned with my own experiences, or reality was far more fluid and mysterious than my scientific worldview had allowed. I returned to work the next day, the silver rosary in my pocket, the card with room 215 written on it tucked into my wallet. I felt like I was living in two worlds simultaneously. The familiar, rational world of medical procedures and scientific certainty, and another world glimpsed at the edges of consciousness, where deceased teenagers appeared in churches and time operated according to different rules. My colleagues noticed my distraction. "Everything okay, Francesca?" my supervisor asked during handover. "You seem somewhere else today." I assured her I was fine, just slightly under the weather. In truth, I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, half expecting to see Carlo Acutis walking through the hospital corridors. My shift passed normally, however, filled with the usual tasks and challenges of critical care nursing. As I was completing my documentation at the end of my shift, a thought occurred to me. I accessed the hospital's architectural archives, which contained floor plans dating back to the facility's construction. I searched for information about room 215, wondering if it had any connection to Carlo. The archives showed that our current room numbering system had been implemented during a renovation in 2010. Prior to that, rooms had been numbered differently. Room 215 in the current system had previously been room 307. The same room number where Maria Bianchi had died. This couldn't be coincidence. But what did it mean? The room was currently occupied by an elderly man recovering from cardiac surgery. No obvious connection to Carlo or Maria. I decided to visit the room after my shift, unsure what I was looking for, but driven by a need to connect these disparate pieces. The cardiac patient was sleeping when I entered room 215-307, his vital signs stable on the monitors. Nothing seemed unusual or noteworthy about the space. I was about to leave when I noticed something on the windowsill, a small prayer card that hadn't been there during my earlier rounds. I picked it up. It featured an image of the Virgin Mary with a prayer printed on the back. Someone had written on it in blue ink, "Tonight, midnight, follow the light." The handwriting matched that on the card Antonia had given me. I looked around the room, but there was no one who could have left the card. The patient was still sleeping, and no visitors were present. I slipped the card into my pocket next to the rosary and left the hospital. my mind racing with possibilities and doubts. I should have reported the mysterious card, should have mentioned the strange coincidences to my supervisor, should have sought professional psychological help for what might be developing delusions. Instead, I went home, ate a quick meal, and set my alarm for 11:30 p.m. I would return to the hospital at midnight as instructed, knowing it was irrational, yet unable to resist the pull of these converging mysteries. I dozed fitfully until my alarm woke me. The rational part of my brain argued vehemently against what I was about to do, sneaking into my workplace in the middle of the night based on cryptic messages, potentially from a deceased teenager. But another part, a part I was only beginning to acknowledge, recognized that I had encountered something housed Block 5. I dozed fitfully until my alarm woke me. The rational part of my brain argued vehemently against what I was about to do, sneaking into my workplace in the middle of the night based on cryptic messages potentially from a deceased teenager. But another part, a part I was only beginning to acknowledge, recognized that I had encountered something beyond rational explanation, something that demanded I step beyond the safe boundaries of my materialist worldview. At 11:45 p.m., I parked my car in the hospital staff lot. Using my ID badge, I entered through the employee's entrance. The night security guard nodded to me sleepily. Nurses coming in for night shifts or staying late to complete paperwork was common enough not to raise suspicion. The corridors were dimly lit and eerily quiet, the nocturnal rhythm of a hospital different from its daytime bustle. I made my way to the oncology floor where both Maria Bianchi's room and the current room 215 were located. As I approached the nurse's station, I prepared a plausible explanation for my presence, checking on a patient's documentation I had forgotten to complete. But the station was temporarily empty, the night nurse likely attending to a patient. I continued down the hallway toward room 215, my footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. The door was closed, the small window showing darkness within. I hesitated, suddenly aware of the absurdity of my actions. What was I doing here, really? Following cryptic messages from a dead teenager and his mother? I had built my career, my entire identity, on rational thought and scientific evidence. Yet here I stood, trembling slightly as I reached for the door handle. Before I could open it, I noticed something extraordinary. From beneath the door came a soft, pulsing light, similar to how Maria's rosary had glowed in the church, but more intense. The light seemed to ripple outward in gentle waves, illuminating the corridor with an otherworldly radiance that was neither the harsh white of hospital lighting nor the warm yellow of incandescent bulbs, but something else entirely, a bluish-white luminescence that seemed almost alive. I stood transfixed, my hand frozen on the door handle. This was not something I could rationalize away as sleep deprivation or emotional stress. This was happening here in the most rational of environments, a modern medical facility filled with cutting-edge technology and scientific protocols. Drawing a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The light momentarily intensified, then settled into a steady glow that emanated from the center of the room. There, standing beside the now empty hospital bed, was CARLO ACUTIS. He wore the same casual clothes as in our church encounter, but now he held a rosary in his hands, the source of the extraordinary light that filled the room. It was neither Maria's wooden beads nor the silver rosary Antonia had sent me, but a third rosary that seemed almost translucent, as if made of crystallized light itself. "You came," he said simply, his voice as clear and normal as in our previous meeting, despite the profoundly abnormal circumstances. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I replied honestly, surprised at my own relative calmness in the face of this impossible scene. Perhaps I had reached some threshold where the extraordinary had become almost expected. "What is this about, Carlo? Why am I here?" He gestured to the empty bed. "This room has significance, Nurse Moretti. In your timeline, it was where Maria Bianchi died 2 days ago. In another timeline, it's where I died in 2006. I shook my head, struggling to process his words. Timelines. That's not possible. You died at a different hospital. I checked the records. Carlo smiled gently. Records reflect the history that most people remember, but reality is more complex than that. There are moments when timelines intersect, when what was and what might have been blur together. This room is such a point of intersection. I don't understand, I admitted, feeling suddenly out of my depth. My medical training had not prepared me for discussions of intersecting timelines and alternate histories. Carlo nodded sympathetically. Think of it like this. In the history most people know, I died at another hospital. But there's a fragment of reality, a splinter of time, where I was transferred to San Rafael in my final days. In that splinter, you were a young nursing student doing a rotation in pediatric oncology. You sat with me during my last hours. You showed me kindness when I was afraid. He paused, his eyes holding mine. You don't remember this because for you, it hasn't happened yet. I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Are you suggesting time travel? That's scientifically impossible. Carlo's laugh was unexpectedly normal, the sound of a teenage boy amused by adult literalness. Not time travel as you understand it from science fiction. I'm talking about the eternal present where past, present, and future exist simultaneously from God's perspective. Occasionally, the boundaries between these time frames thin, especially around moments of spiritual significance. He held up the glowing rosary. Tonight is such a moment. If you're willing, you can experience what you don't remember yet. What for you is still in the future, though it happened in the past. My scientific mind rebelled against this metaphysical concept, yet I found myself nodding slowly. What do I need to do? Carlo extended the luminous rosary toward me. Take this and sit beside the bed. The rest will unfold as it already has, in a sense. With trembling fingers, I accepted the rosary. The moment it touched my skin, the light surged, enveloping me in its radiance. The room seemed to shimmer and dissolve around me, reforming into a slightly different configuration, the same space but with older equipment, different decor. The bed was now occupied by a thin teenage boy with patches of hair loss connected to IV lines and monitors. With a shock, I recognized him as Carlo Acutis himself, not the healthy-looking teenager who had just handed me the rosary, but a dying boy ravaged by leukemia. A young woman sat beside the bed, holding his hand, a nursing student in a slightly outdated uniform, her face partly obscured as she bent over the patient. With a jolt of recognition that defied all logic, I realized I was looking at my younger self, approximately 14 years ago. But this was impossible. I had never met Carlo Acutis during my training. I had never sat with him as he died. This scene could not be a memory, yet it felt profoundly familiar, as if I were remembering something I had somehow forgotten. The younger version of myself spoke softly to the dying boy. "Are you comfortable, Carlo? Is there anything I can get you?" Her voice, my voice, yet not quite as I knew it, was gentle, tinged with the compassion that had led me to nursing in the first place, before years of clinical detachment had hardened my approach. The boy on the bed, Carlo, as he had been in his final hours, smiled weakly. "No, thank you. Just don't leave, please. I'm a little scared." My younger self squeezed his hand. "I'll stay right here. There's nothing to be afraid of." Carlo's eyes, bright despite his physical deterioration, met hers directly. "I'm not afraid of dying exactly. I know where I'm going. But the in-between part, that's scary." The young nursing student nodded understandingly. "That's normal. Everyone feels that way, but you won't be alone." As I watched this impossible scene unfold, I became aware of dual consciousness. I was simultaneously the observer in 2023 and the participant in 2006, experiencing both perspectives at once. I could feel the weight of Carlo's hand in mine, could smell the antiseptic hospital air of that night 14 years ago, could feel the mixture of professional compassion and personal sadness that had filled me as I sat with this dying boy. "Can I tell you something, Nurse Francesca?" Carlo asked, his voice growing weaker. My younger self leaned closer to hear him. "Of course." "Someday," he whispered, "years from now, we'll meet again. You'll be different. You'll have forgotten what it means to see with the heart instead of just the mind. But I'll remind you." My younger self smiled indulgently, assuming these were simply the peaceful delusions of a dying teenager. "I'm sure we will, Carlo. Try to rest now." But Carlo's eyes remained intensely focused. "When we meet again, you'll be carrying a rosary that isn't yours. That's how you'll know it's really me." The young nursing student nodded soothingly, humoring him. I, however, felt a profound chill of recognition. Carlo was describing exactly what had happened with Maria Bianchi's rosary. The scene continued to unfold before me, my younger self maintaining a compassionate vigil as Carlo's condition deteriorated through the night. Around 6:30 a.m., his breathing became more labored. Medical staff entered, checked his vitals, adjusted medications. A priest arrived to administer last rites. Through it all, my younger self remained beside him, fulfilling her promise not to leave. As dawn broke outside the window, Carlo opened his eyes one final time. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "I can see everything." My younger self squeezed his hand. "What do you see, Carlo?" A radiant smile transformed his pain-racked face. "Heaven, it's opening, and the Eucharist. It really is the highway." His eyes focused on something beyond the room, beyond the physical world. "Thank you, Nurse Francesca. Remember, we'll meet again." At precisely 6:45 a.m., Carlo Acutis took his final breath. A doctor confirmed death, made notations in the chart. My younger self gently placed his hand on the bed and stood, wiping tears from her eyes. A nurse approached her, the very same Elena who was now my colleague, though younger. "You did well, student. That's the hardest part of nursing, being present for the end. But you gave him comfort." My younger self nodded, visibly moved by the experience. "He said we'd meet again someday. He seemed so certain." Elena patted her shoulder sympathetically. "The dying often find peace in such thoughts. Now go get some rest. I'll complete the documentation." As my younger self left the room, the scene began to shimmer and dissolve around me. I found myself back in the present-day room 215, the glowing rosary still in my hands, but its light now softer, gentler. Carlo, the teenage Carlo who had given me the rosary, not the dying boy I had just witnessed, stood watching me, his expression questioning. "You remember now?" he asked simply. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. The experience had been so vivid, so real, not like watching a movie or even like having a memory, but like truly living that moment again. "But how is this possible?" I finally managed. "I have no record of that rotation in my educational history. There's no documentation that you were ever at San Rafael. None of my instructors ever mentioned that I attended your death." Carlo smiled gently. "Reality is more fluid than your scientific mind wants to accept, Francesca. In the history most people remember, I died at another hospital. In the history you've just experienced, things happened differently. Both are true in their own way." He gestured around the room. "Certain places serve as hinges between different versions of reality. Hospitals especially, where the veil between worlds is naturally thinner due to the transitions that happen here daily. Your scientific instruments can't detect these fluctuations in reality, but human souls can sometimes perceive them. Maria Bianchi sensed it. That's why she wanted you to have her rosary. She recognized you were approaching such a hinge moment." My analytical mind struggled to process these metaphysical concepts, searching for a framework to organize this new information. "So you're saying there are multiple realities, multiple timelines? That contradicts everything we understand about physics." Carlo shook his head. "Not multiple independent realities, Rather, reality is more multidimensional than your three-dimensional science can currently measure. Think of it like a book. Each page exists simultaneously, even though you can only read one page at a time. From outside the book, all pages exist at once. God exists outside the book. Saints and angels can perceive multiple pages simultaneously. Most humans are limited to their current page, but at certain moments, like this one, the pages can briefly overlap. Despite the fantastic nature of his explanation, something about it resonated with me, perhaps because I had just experienced exactly what he was describing, moving between different pages of reality through the medium of the glowing rosary. "Why show me this?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Why is it important that I remember attending your death when officially it happened differently?" Carlo's expression became more serious. "Because you're at a crossroads, Francesca. The compassionate nursing student who comforted me as I died gradually became the cynical nurse who mocked Maria Bianchi's faith. You built walls around your heart, reduced human experience to biological processes, forgot how to see beyond the visible. Remembering our first meeting is the key to remembering who you truly are." His words struck me with unexpected force. He was right. Somewhere along my professional journey, I had lost the compassionate openness of my early training years. I had embraced scientific materialism not just as a methodology, but as a complete worldview, dismissing the spiritual dimensions of human experience that couldn't be measured or quantified. "The rosaries," I said slowly, pieces connecting in my mind. "Maria's wooden beads, your mother's silver one, and now this glowing one, they're all connected somehow?" Carlo nodded. "The rosary is a physical object that serves as a bridge between the material and spiritual realms, a tool for prayer, yes, but also a symbol of connection. Maria's rosary connected you to her experience of faith. My mother's rosary connected you to my story. This luminous rosary has connected you to your own forgotten past. Together, they form a kind of spiritual triangulation, locating you precisely at this moment of potential transformation." The metaphor made a strange kind of sense, especially coming from the teenager known for his technological aptitude. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly aware that we were approaching some kind of culmination. Carlo's expression was both serious and gentle. "That depends on you, Francesca. You've been given a glimpse beyond the limitations of your materialist worldview, evidence that reality is more expansive, more mysterious than your science alone can explain. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. You can rationalize it away as hallucination or delusion, return to your comfortable certainties, or you can allow this experience to transform how you see the world, how you practice your profession, how you connect with patients in their most vulnerable moments." As I considered his words, the luminous rosary in my hands began to pulse with increasing intensity. The light spread outward, filling the room with its radiance, making the ordinary hospital space seem temporarily transfigured into something sacred. "I should warn you," Carlo added, his figure beginning to shimmer slightly at the edges. "Transformation isn't always comfortable. Seeing beyond the material often means acknowledging your own spiritual hunger, your own need for meaning beyond the merely biological. It means approaching your patients not just as bodies to be healed, but as souls on a journey. Are you willing to risk that kind of vulnerability again?" The question hung in the air between us, weighted with significance. I thought of Maria Bianchi, of how I had dismissed her faith as mere superstition, of the countless other patients whose spiritual concerns I had ignored or minimized throughout my career. I thought of the young nursing student I had just witnessed, myself as I had once been, capable of sitting with a dying teenager and offering genuine comfort rather than clinical detachment. And I thought of Carlo himself, who in both timelines had faced death with remarkable serenity because of his faith in something beyond the physical world. "Yes," I said finally, my voice firm despite the emotion tightening my throat. "I'm willing. I want to remember how to see with both my mind and my heart." Carlo's smile was radiant, matching the light that now filled the room almost to blinding intensity. "Then your real journey is just beginning, Francesca. The rosary will help you when doubts return, as they will. My mother will help you understand the path, and I'll be closer than you think." As he spoke these final words, the light peaked in brilliance, forcing me to close my eyes against its intensity. When I opened them again, I was alone in room 215. The mysterious luminous rosary was gone, but in its place on the empty bed lay Maria's wooden beads, the ones I had thought lost or returned to her family. I picked them up with trembling fingers. They felt warm to the touch, as if recently held, though they no longer emitted any visible light. I left the hospital in a state of profound disorientation, driving home on autopilot as my mind struggled to process everything I had experienced. By the time I reached my apartment, dawn was breaking over Milan, the early morning light transforming the urban landscape. I should have been exhausted, yet I felt strangely energized, as if the encounter with Carlo had recharged something within me that had been depleted for years. I placed Maria's rosary carefully on my nightstand, next to the silver one Antonia had sent me. Together, they seemed to form a connection, a bridge between different aspects of this extraordinary experience. Then I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I knelt beside my bed and attempted to pray. The words didn't come easily at first. I had no formal prayers memorized, and the spontaneous expression of spiritual sentiment felt awkward after so many years of scientific rationalism. But gradually, haltingly, I found myself speaking from the heart, thanking whatever higher power might exist for the gift of this unexpected awakening, asking for guidance on the journey ahead, expressing gratitude for the patients who had trusted me with their care over the years, even when I had been blind to their spiritual needs. As I spoke these simple words into the quiet morning, I felt a subtle shift within me, not a dramatic conversion or emotional catharsis, but a gentle reorientation, as if some internal compass that had been spinning wildly had finally found its true north. Over the following weeks, I began a careful, thoughtful integration of my extraordinary experiences into my daily life and professional practice. I didn't suddenly become overtly religious or abandon my scientific training. That would have been inauthentic and ultimately unhelpful to my patients. Instead, I found myself developing a more balanced approach, one that honored both the scientific precision of modern medicine and the spiritual dimensions of human experience that transcend purely materialist explanations. When patients mentioned faith or prayer, I no longer dismissed these as irrelevant to their medical care, but recognized them as potentially powerful resources for healing and comfort. I met with Antonia Salzano again, this time intentionally reaching out to her rather than encountering her by chance. Over coffee at a small cafe near the Duomo, I shared my experiences with her, the visions of Carlo, the mysterious rosaries, the impossible memory of attending her son's death in a timeline that officially never happened. She listened without surprise or skepticism, nodding occasionally as if I were simply confirming what she already knew. "Carlo continues his mission," she said when I had finished. "In life, he used technology to connect people with faith. In death, he seems to be doing the same, but in more direct ways." She smiled, a mother's pride evident despite the extraordinary nature of our conversation. He was always one to push boundaries. "How do you make sense of it all?" I asked her, genuinely curious about how she integrated these supernatural elements into her daily life. The different timelines, the appearances, the seemingly impossible connections across time and space. Antonia considered my question thoughtfully. "I don't try to explain it scientifically. That would be like trying to describe color to someone who can only see in black and white. I simply accept that reality is more mysterious, more wonderful than our limited human understanding can fully comprehend." That doesn't mean abandoning reason. Carlo was very rational, very methodical in his approach to life. It means recognizing that reason has its limits, that there are truths that can only be perceived through different faculties. Her words reminded me of something Carlo had said during our encounters, about seeing with the heart as well as the mind. It seemed this family shared not just a faith, but a particular approach to it, one that integrated rationality and mystery rather than seeing them as opposed. Antonia reached into her purse and withdrew a small book. Carlo kept a spiritual journal during his illness. I've had a few copies printed for those who seem particularly connected to his story. I think you might find it helpful on your journey. She handed me the slim volume, its cover featuring the now familiar photograph of Carlo with his gentle smile. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gift. "I'm still finding my way through all of this. I don't know exactly what it means or where it's leading." Antonia's smile was knowing. None of us do entirely. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the journey even when the destination isn't fully visible. As we parted, she embraced me warmly, as if we were old friends rather than recent acquaintances connected through extraordinary circumstances. "You'll always be welcome in our home, Francesca. Carlo considered you important in his mission, which makes you family in a way." Her unconditional acceptance touched me deeply. This woman who had lost her son, yet radiated such serenity and purpose, who spoke of impossible things with the calm certainty of one who had witnessed them firsthand. Back at work, I found myself approaching my nursing duties with a renewed sense of vocation. The technical aspects remained important: medication administration, vital signs monitoring, wound care, all the essential tasks that maintain physical health. But now, I also attended to less tangible aspects of patient care, listening more attentively when they spoke of fears or hopes, respecting religious symbols and practices rather than dismissing them as irrelevant to medical treatment, recognizing that healing involves more than just biological processes. My colleagues noticed the change. "You seem different lately," Elena commented one day as we completed our shift handover. "More present somehow." I smiled, unsure how much to share. Elena had been tangentially involved in my experiences with Carlo and Maria Bianchi, but I wasn't ready to reveal the full extent of what had happened. "I've been reconsidering some of my assumptions," I said carefully, "about patience, about care, about what constitutes healing." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Good. You were becoming too clinical, too detached. It doesn't help patients, and eventually, it doesn't help us either. We burn out when we forget the human connection at the center of what we do." Her perceptive comment surprised me. I hadn't realized how obvious my professional hardening had been to those around me, or how my recent transformation might be visible to observant colleagues. 2 months after my midnight encounter with Carlo in room 215, I experienced another extraordinary moment, less dramatic than the previous ones, but equally meaningful. I was attending to an elderly cancer patient who was clearly approaching his final days. As I adjusted his medication, he suddenly gripped my hand with surprising strength. "There's a young man standing behind you," he said, his voice clearer than it had been in days. "He's holding something bright in his hands. He says to tell you that you're doing well, remembering how to see with both eyes now." A chill ran through me. I turned, half expecting to see Carlo standing there, but the room contained only the patient and myself. When I looked back at my patient, he had drifted back to sleep, his face peaceful. Was this a coincidence? A medication-induced hallucination that happened to align with my recent experiences? Perhaps. But I chose to see it as another connection, another confirmation of the journey I had begun. That night, I opened Carlo's spiritual journal for the first time, reading his reflections on faith, technology, illness, and eternity. One passage in particular resonated deeply. "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven, but every act of love is a step along that road. We don't need to wait for death to begin the journey. Each time we choose compassion over indifference, presence over distraction, hope over despair, we move closer to our true home. The words seemed to speak directly to my professional practice as a nurse. Each interaction with a patient was an opportunity to choose compassion over clinical detachment, true presence over busy efficiency, hope over medical pessimism. Carlo's spirituality, I was discovering, wasn't abstract or otherworldly, but deeply practical, concerned with how we live our ordinary days and how we treat those entrusted to our care. Slowly, thoughtfully, I began integrating these insights into my nursing practice. I didn't preach or proselytize. That wouldn't have been appropriate in a medical setting. But I did approach each patient with a more holistic awareness of their needs, recognizing that physical care alone was insufficient for true healing. I kept Maria's wooden rosary in my pocket during night shifts, not as a religious talisman, but as a reminder of the lessons I had learned through these extraordinary experiences. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when the ward was sleeping, I would hold it and reflect on how dramatically my perspective had changed in just a few months. From a cynical materialist who had mocked patients' faith, I had become someone who recognized the limitations of a purely scientific worldview, who understood that reality encompassed dimensions beyond what could be measured or quantified in a laboratory. If you've been touched by this story of transformation, I invite you to share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever encountered something that couldn't be explained by conventional understanding? Has a patient, a loved one, or even a stranger ever helped you see beyond your comfortable certainties? Your stories create a tapestry of shared wisdom that enriches us all. If this testimony has resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing to join our community of seekers and healers who recognize that true care embraces both the scientific and the spiritual dimensions of human experience. 1 year after my first encounter with Carlo Acutis, I attended his beatification ceremony in Assisi, a formal recognition by the Catholic Church of his holy life and continuing spiritual influence. I stood among thousands of pilgrims, many of them young people drawn to this modern teenager who had combined deep faith with technological savvy. As I watched the proceedings, I reflected on my own continuing journey. I hadn't experienced any dramatic visions since that night in room 215, but I had noticed countless smaller signs, meaningful coincidences, moments of unexpected clarity, connections with patients that transcended ordinary clinical interaction. The extraordinary had gradually become integrated into my ordinary life, not as dramatic interruptions, but as a deeper dimension of everyday experience. I continue to practice nursing at San Rafael Hospital, bringing both scientific precision and spiritual awareness to my work. I've begun volunteering at a hospice 1 day a week, using my medical skills to ease physical suffering while also creating space for patients to express their spiritual concerns as they approach life's final transition. I still carry Maria's rosary during night shifts, and Carlo's spiritual journal remains on my nightstand, a source of continuing inspiration. The silver rosary from Antonia rests on my home altar. Yes, I now have a small sacred space in my apartment, something my former self would have found absurd. My journey continues to unfold in ways I could never have anticipated when I first encountered Maria Bianchi and her blessed rosary. I don't claim to understand fully what happened during those extraordinary weeks. The appearances of Carlo, the impossible memory of his death in a timeline that officially never occurred, the mysterious glowing rosary that connected past and present. Perhaps someday science will develop frameworks to explain such phenomena. Or perhaps some experiences simply transcend our current capacity for explanation, inviting us to expand our understanding of what constitutes reality. What I know with certainty is this: my encounter with Carlo Acutis transformed not just my belief system, but my entire approach to my profession and my life. I now recognize that true healing encompasses body, mind, and spirit, that compassionate presence can be as therapeutic as medical intervention, that there are dimensions to human experience that cannot be measured by our most sophisticated instruments, but are nonetheless real and significant. The nurse who once mocked a patient's statue of the Virgin Mary now understands that faith is not a weakness to be pitied, but potentially a profound source of strength and comfort in the face of suffering. So if you find yourself in a hospital bed someday and notice your nurse carrying a wooden rosary in her pocket, it might be me, Francesca Moretti, the critical care nurse whose worldview was shattered and rebuilt by a deceased teenage boy with a glowing rosary. I won't impose my beliefs on you or neglect your medical care in favor of spiritual platitudes. But I will see you completely, not just as a collection of symptoms to be treated, but as a whole person with physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions, all equally deserving of compassionate attention. Because that, ultimately, is Carlo's continuing gift to me and through me to my patients, the ability to see with both the sharp clarity of science and the compassionate wisdom of the heart, recognizing that true healing embraces both.